This video is about Zen 3 architecture and about the reasons why Zen 3 will have a probably 6 floating point units and why it will probably support also AVX512. This means Intel will have a really serious problems with the Zen 3 and especially with the Zen 4. Yes, so we will talk about both Zen 3 and Zen 4 because those CPUs is a part of the 19H family. So we will talk about the leaked numbers and what it means for architecture, and so we can predict how it can look like, all the architecture for Zen 3 and Zen 4. Okay, so let's summarize what we do know about Zen 3 architecture from officially from AMD. And actually we do know that it's completely new architecture. It was confirmed by Forrest Norrod from AMD because when we look at you can see here it's a completely new architecture. So yeah, this suggests that there will be bigger architectural changes. Next thing we do know from AMD that it will have a new family number and probably 19H family, which actually means some big changes in the architecture or new instruction set support. So for probably Zen 3 might have AVX512. And the evidence for this is actually from the software optimization guide from AMD for the Zen 1 and Zen 2 processors, because when we look at this is the Zen 1 actually from June 17. You can see this is for the family 17H. This is the Zen 1 architecture. But when we look at the documentation from Zen 2, and so you can see here the edit and greater processors, which means that actually this optimization document is valid for every 17H processors, and there will be no major changes already. It means it's closed. So it means Zen 3 will be something different. And because we know that the 18H family is the Chinese version of the Zen 1, probably the naming will be 19H family number. Another thing we do know that Zen 3 is not a reaction on Apple A11 Monsoon, because Apple A11 Monsoon is the first CPU which is using 6 LUs since 2017. And when we take a look on the timeline, actually 2017 is here. So we can see that Zen 3 development probably started 2015 when the Zen 1 architecture was finished. So actually Zen 3 cannot be a reaction to first 6 LU CPU architecture on the world, which is the Apple. We are waiting actually right now for the Apple A14, which is the last generation, probably last generation of the 6 LU from Apple, and it's a 4th generation already. Let's go back and recap what we know from the leaks actually. So we do know that we expect 15% IPC in the integer. Some rumor says 50% in the floating point actually, and that's we should take this, especially this number, really seriously, because there is a pretty nice way how to increase 50% IPC in terms of floating point units. Yeah, this is the reason why I'm talking about 6 floating point units in the Zen 3 architecture. This is a major architecture change, and actually it's perfectly fits into this 50% rumor. And overall IPC should be 17%, because yeah, because most of the code doesn't use floating point operations much, so the overall IPC will be not as good as this theoretical floating point. And some rumor says that we can expect more than 20%. We know that Zen 2 had a 15% higher IPC than Zen 1, so we can take this IPC uplift and recalculate it to Zen 1, and we will get a 32% in terms of integer IPC. Actually, that's a lot. It's like a 1/3. And this, for my expectation, is suggests that instead of 4 LAUs, which is 4 wide, probably Zen 3 will be at least 5 wide. And if you actually calculate going from 4 to 5, is actually 25%. So 25% is like the minimum I would expect from a Zen 3, but it also means that we might expect 6 wide integer in Zen 3. So it might be 5 or 6 wide integer. And let's take a look on the floating point. So we can see here 50%. This is from the 6 floating point units. And those 15%, 20%, according to Zen 1, was caused by doubling the width of the units from 128-bit wide, and 50% in the floating point performance. It's my suggestion is it's evidence that Zen 3 will be beast. It will have a 6 floating point units. This is a really huge jump, and my suggestion is it's only 256-bit wide, because on 7 nanometer there is probably not enough die space to make it a 512 wide. But again, it's way enough against Intel, so it will be really beast. And the overall is like a 35%, which means they need to also boost the memory units. So my suggestion that going from 3 memory units, load store units, to 35%, it's like a 1/3. So it's almost exactly. Then 3 will need actually probably 4 memory units. Jim Color said that you need a complete CPU redesign approximately every 4 years. So now we will take a look on a timeline, and we will talk about what he meant actually. Jim Keller started the development of the Apple A7 here. This was really major new architecture for Apple, and because it was 4 LAU architecture, and they jumped from 2 LAU really efficient core, really narrow core. They actually doubled the execution units. This is really huge change. This is like from 2 LAU bulldozer, they jumped right away to 4 LAU Zen. So, and it was back in 2009, and we can see the pattern here. Every 4 years, and after 4 years, you can see here Apple A11 Monsoon, which is first 6 LAU architecture on the world, was actually released in 2017 here. So we can see here the pattern. Apple is doing completely architecture redesign every 4 years, and So we expect Apple A14 to be the last one of the 6 LUs, and the next year should be completely new redesign, completely new architecture, and probably some 8 LU beast actually. And in the meantime, Apple is doing pretty major uh, uplift, because when we take a look on the Apple A9 Twister, it brought IPC 32% IPC uplift, and it was still for LAU design. And yeah, let's see the numbers, because those numbers are really interesting. And we can see here Apple A7 and Apple A8 was 11% uplift. This was just a small evolution. Big redesign of the 4 LAU architecture was the Apple A9 Twister, and it brought 32%. This is a huge jump. And the last 4 LAU Apple A10 Hurricane here, it brought only 8% IPC more. So yeah, and the next is Apple A11 Monsoon, the 6 LAU Monster core, first on the world, and it brought again almost 20% IPC uplift. This is huge. And another big uplift was the Apple A13 Lightning, and it was another 14% uplift, which is a lot. And in the meantime, the small uplift was the Apple A12 Vortex, and it was, but still, it's like small uplift, and it's 13% IPC. So we do expect from Apple A14 maybe 10% uplift from Apple A13. And this is really important to understand that the development of the CPU is similar for every company actually. We can see the trend of the IPC here. The Apple, there was a main new, completely new architecture here. And there was a small redesign here and small redesign here. And Apple A14 will be the last small uplift, and there is a Apple A15 will be completely new architecture. So let's take a look on the Intel also, because this is another competitor to AMD. And we can see here Intel Merom. This is the Core 2 Duo. First 3 LAU design. This is a major architecture here. And then it was Intel Nehalem. It was a small redesign. Penryn was just a shrink with some minor improvements. Another big jump for the Intel was Intel Sandy Bridge. And Haswell was a completely new 4 LAU core. So it was together with the Apple A7 first 4 LAU CPUs on the world. So you can see Intel is doing different strategy. He's doing actually 3 major redesigns in between for each architecture. And after 2 big redesigns, they do big, completely new architecture. So we can expect Haswell was the first. The first redesign was a Skylake. Then another big step up was Ice Lake, a still 4 LAU. So we do expect Golden Cove to be 6 LAU, completely new architecture. Maybe we'll see, but the pattern is like here, and it should be. Could be something different, could be maybe 5 LAUs, who knows actually. But it should be something really different from Haswell, Skylake, and Ice Lake. And if we take a look on the IPC of the Intel, we will see that, yeah, it's also interesting. Core 2 Duo brought really high IPC, and there was a Nihalem somewhere in between, somewhere here, and the Sandy Bridge. But you can compare Sandy Bridge to Core 2 Duo. It was big uplift. It was like a more than 30% IPC uplift within one new generation within the 3 LAU design actually, and as well as a first 4 LAU design, it's up to Ice Lake. It didn't brought that much actually. It was maybe 25%. So yeah, Intel is kind of slowing down, and his time frame, like a cycle when he released the CPUs, is going to be kind of slowing down actually. And because if the new Golden Cove should come 21, maybe 22, you can see Intel has a problem with the schedule, and the planning is, everything is delayed. We know it because it's a 10 nanometer, but of course the pattern is there. They try to do every 6 years to do the major redesign, and in between to do some major uplifts. Yeah, but let's take a look on AMD, and because AMD is doing approximately the same, we can see here, yeah, Zen 1 and Zen 3 development started after 3 years. So the original product cycle was 3 years, canceling K12, which was the ARM CPU. They increased the cadence of the products to 1.5 year per CPU architecture. So actually we can expect Zen 3 as a new major redesign here, which will be available here in 2020, late on 2020, and Zen 4 as a major uplift 1 year or 1.5 years after. So depends on when the Zen 4 started, when the development of the Zen 4 started. Actually, it might happen probably beginning of the last year, so it's almost 2017. So actually Zen 4 might come quite early after Zen 3, because Zen 3 looks like it's kind of delayed. But the CPU, the architecture development usually is not delayed, because Zen 3 could be delayed because of the whatever HBM memory implementation, whatever they will come up with. But Zen 4 could be on time and could be in the middle of the next year actually. So yeah, some people might be also surprised that Zen 4 could be really soon here, but this is because of it really fits the timeline here. When it was started 2015, yeah, development 4 year, usually 2019. So yeah, probably Zen 3 was planned to be early this year, but something was delayed there. But the development of the Zen 4 could be it's kind of independent. So Zen 4 might come really soon. Okay, let's go back to architecture and to the numbers we expect. So the minimum we expect from the integer is that AMD will go at least from 4 wide to 5 wide, and for the floating point they will be, for 90% probability, there will be 6 floating point units. And you probably know that AMD is using a pretty smart design of the floating point units. It's using 4 pipelines. Even the functionality is like a really uh, one floating point pipe is concentrated on additions. The another one can do the multiplication. So it's like the functionality is like this is one floating point unit normally, but because they put it into 4 pipelines in code which is mixtured like a 50% with the addition and multiplications, they can actually achieve IPC increase about 50% in really good optimized code, and it's kind of free. So this is really smart design which is AMD is using. So I do expect that AMD will continue this, and they will add 2 more floating point units here. So the floating point units are pretty simple, what we can expect from the Zen 3. Zen 3 is going to be the beast, but bigger question is the integer actually. So when we look here at the Zen 3 prediction, there is several possibilities actually. There is small estimation, like a smaller core, and the bigger core. The bigger core is really huge. This is kind of inspiration by the Apple, but Apple was released 2017, and Zen 3 development probably started much early in 2015. So I don't think so that this is happening. This is like kind of less probable unless Jim Keller suggested for the next development this. But I expect that this smaller variant is more realistic for the Zen 3, and it's smaller, but in terms of floating point it's still huge. It has a 6 floating point units. I think it will absolutely destroy Intel, and Intel will have a really big problems with the AMD. So those 6 floating point units are like a no-brainer, and AMD will be super good in this. But the other question is, what about the integer core? Because this is also important for, this is maybe even more important for the general computation. So the integer core, um, in our performance, the IPC, it showed really probably 4 wide to 5 wide at least, because this is 25%, and we do expect 32% actually. And to go 6 wide, it would mean that it is like a 50% uplift, which kind of might correspond with the Zen 4. So this is for me unclear. This is really hard to predict this integer performance, because there is several possibilities, and I'm going to explain you what they might we expect from Zen 3. So 5 wide variant could be like this, like a 4 LAU units, and one special, the 5th pipe could be dedicated to branch unit, the same way like a ARM CPU is using it, like a AMD K12, and so it could be related to the AMD K12, because AMD K12 was in terms of IPC bigger beast than the Zen 1, even it was sister core. So Zen 3 could be based on AMD K12 architecture, and AMD K12 was 5 wide. So this is one suggestion what can happen. Another thing, the bigger thing, is that Apple A11 Monsoon is really big beast. It has 6 LAUs here plus 2 branch units. which means it's 8 wide, but we do expect to be 6 wide only. That could be 6 LAU units with 2 branches shared here. So most of the time this unit will be disabled by the branching most of the time. So it will be kind of 5 LAU units wide in the code, running some loops. So this is like a maximum variant I do expect from the Zen 3. This is the minimum variant, and could be also something in between. In between could be 5 LAUs with shared branches on those last 2 ports. So this is the kind of middle variant. And the third variant, or the fourth variant actually, another middle variant could be actually the same thing the ARM Cortex cores they do actually. And because ARM Cortex cores, they do have a always separated branch unit since Cortex, since ever, like they do always do separated branch unit. Also 76 has a separated branch unit, and Cortex 77 has a 2 separated branch units, the same like the Apple does. And Cortex 78, the new one, and X1 especially, also has a 2 special branch pipelines. So Zen 3 could be 4 wide in terms of LAU units, and but the 6 wide could be in terms of 2 separated branch ports. So this is another possible architecture design. Zen 3 could have it, but yeah, it's really hard to say. But I never saw actually the x86 CPU having a special branch unit here. Intel and AMD was always using branch units shared with the LAU. So my expectation actually is that most probable thing is that Zen 3 will have a 5 wide, but there will be LAU unit here. So actually it will be 5 LAUs here. Okay, so there is a 5 different variants for integer core for the Zen 3. And this is the lightweight variant. This is 5 wide with only 4 LAUs. It's really similar to the K12. And the other extreme is a full 6 integer units, which means 6 LAUs. And but yeah, let's recap all the possible things which can happen in the middle of this. So let's take a look on the middle variants. And there is a next thing is that there is a 5 wide integer which is using 5 LAU units, and those last has a shared branch, which is clearly pretty nice. This I would expect maybe from Zen 3, like the most probable. This is my favorite one, this one. And I expect if there is a 6 wide integer, we can do expect the lightweight version, 4 LAUs plus 2 branches, kind of ARM Cortex cores they use. This is also really nice. Even it's like probably less performance than this one. So still this one I prefer more than this 6 wide. But another really interesting thing is this one. This is 6 wide, but using only 5 5 values, of course, and only one separated pipe for the branches. This is kind of a hybrid situation. This is kind of uplifted K12 design. So actually, and this might happen because K12 was really taped out. The design worked. They have already used it. Even it was the K12 was never released. It was cancelled. But the K12 was developed, and it could be used as an inspiration for the Zen 3 actually. And Zen 3, because it's wider in terms of floating point and probably somewhere also everywhere, so they can use the K12 concept and implement it to 6 wide integer. So this is also my favorite. So this one, this kind of light version, and this 6 wide version, those two options are my favorite in terms of the Zen 3. And maybe I like this wider version even more because I like the option they can actually add some functionality to this port. So Zen 4 might be extended with another LIU unit here. So it leaves a lot of options. Also, I like the wider version of the memory units. And they're like when there is a 4 load pipelines and 2 store pipelines. This actually allows you to have a lot of possibilities to add memory units. So it's really flexible, this. So I actually consider this one as my favorite. And this is what we can expect from the Zen 3. Another important thing are the memory units, because memory units, they actually, there are in the code almost 50% of the instructions are the loads and the stores. So those memory units are pretty important for high performance. So we will take a look what we can expect from the Zen 3. And but to understand how many of the units for the memory we need to take a look on the distribution of the instructions in the typical code. And to do that, we need to look at this picture. And yeah, we can see there is actually comparison between the ARM and x86. x86 is mostly more memory heavy. It's probably because ARM has a 32 registers and x86 has only 16 registers for 64-bit mode. But we can see here that, for example, in this mobile code, let's say, there is approximately 30, maybe 35% of the load instructions and approximately 12% of store instructions. So in the typical code, depends on you can see here the floating point in the spec benchmark has a almost 50% distribution of the memory units. But you can see it's approximately 45% of the instructions are actually the load and stores. So when we have 6 floating point units and 5 integer units, it's together is 11 wide. We actually need, and those units, they consist of this. This is like almost 60%, right? It's like a 60 to 40% distribution. So when we have 11 units for the floating point and integer, so we need approximately almost the same number of the memory units. And so we should have something like a 6, 7 memory units to be able to crunch the code pretty equally to have a good distribution across all the execution units. Yeah, in terms of memory units, it looks like simple because normally when you need to calculate A plus B is equal to C in your program, this is actually the answer why there is a more loads and less stores, because you need to load A, and A is loading here, the instruction B is loading in this instruction, and you do calculation here in the integer or the floating point units, and the last instruction you need is the store. The result needs to be stored on the address C. So yeah, it looks pretty simple, right? But it's not that easy because you can do a lot of tricks. So theoretically, a Zen 3 architecture would need, because we have 6 floating point units here, plus 5 white integers, so it's together it's 11, divided by 60%, it's total 18 units. So actually, to multiply it by those 40% for the memory units, you will end up with a 7 memory units normally to keep the normal ratio here. But I will show you that. Let's compare the other CPUs and architectures, because you will see that it's not that actually simple. And let's take a look on the Intel Ice Lake. And Intel Ice Lake is a pretty good example that the calculation works actually. But so you can see Intel has like 2 store pipelines, and it has 4 memory, 4 address generation units. So it has 6 pipelines for only 4 ports for the execution. So it has a more than 50%. So it's pretty memory heavy, the Ice Lake, but it somehow fits the calculation that you need almost, yeah, 50% execution needs to memory needs. Even you need more, 60%. So Intel Ice Lake is kind of memory heavy. But when we take a look on the Zen 2 here, Zen 2 has like 4 integer units and 4 floating point units. This is like a 8 execution units for the calculation, and it has 3 pipelines, 1 for the store and 2 for the load. So actually, when we do the calculation, it means it is 8 to 3. So it's kind of Zen 2 is kind of weak in terms of memory units, but we have to remember that Zen architecture has also one store unit is actually hidden here under this third pipeline. There is a one store unit here, so actually it has a kind of four memory units. Even it's like not a full, it's helping to move data between the floating point registers to the general purpose registers. But you can see here that it's starting to be really complicated, and actually the calculation doesn't work. So even the Ice Lake actually, it's a kind of really strong in the memory operations. Zen 2 looks like it's kind of weak in the memory operations, and Zen 1 had only 2. But Zen 1 also had the store pipeline here. So There was just this other generation unit for the stores was not there. But let's compare also the Cortex X1. Cortex X1 is really beast in terms of memory units, because this is the first CPU on the world which can do 3 loads per cycle. And this is really, yeah, there is no other CPU can do 3 loads per cycle. This is really unique. And the last Cortex A77 was able to do only those two. So yeah, last generation for the 1 year they added this load pipeline, and yeah, X1 is really beast, and also the Hercules A78. So when we do the calculation for Cortex X1, we will get there is a 10 units for the integer and the floating point, divided by 0.6 is actually should be total 16 units, which means 40% should be memory. So it's kind of suggestion that there should be like a 6 pipelines, 6 memory units, and we can see here that we have only 5. But yeah, it's a little bit less, but it somehow corresponds with the calculation. But when we do the Zen 2 calculation, so we can see here that Zen 2 has a 4 integer and 4 floating points, so it's total 8 divided by 60%. So we should have 13 pipelines total, multiplied by 4 the memory units. Zen 2 should have 5 memory units. So it's kind of weak in the memory unit, Zen, but maybe it is because AMD is using, instead of 2 floating points units, is using 4 pipelines. So in real, it behaves like a 6 wide, 4 LAUs plus 2 floating point units. So let's recalculate it, and we will see. So it's actually 6 wide divided by 60%, and we should have a 10 pipelines, and multiplied by 40%, we should have like a 4 memory units, which is now starting to be fitted more. So yeah, so those 3 memory units here for Zen 2, yeah, it somehow corresponds with also with the Cortex. They should be 6, but they have only 5. Intel is kind of memory heavy, so there is no problem. But the biggest magic, biggest magic is doing the Apple, actually, because Apple is absolutely monsters. Apple has like a 9 wide. The Apple A13 is 9 wide. This is incredible. It has a 6 actually, 6 LAU units. It has a 6 shifters. It's absolutely incredible. Like a 2 divider units and 2 multiplication units. This is like outperforming everybody else, and plus 3 special branches. So yeah, and Apple, I'm pretty sure Apple is using also the same design as AMD, because yeah, because Zen architecture, Zen 1, was really similar to the Apple A7 because of Jim Keller. Jim Keller came from Apple when he was working on the A7 Cyclone, and then he started to work on the Zen 1. So there is no wonder that the Zen 1 architecture, it is really similar to the Apple A7 Cyclone. But let's go back to Zen 3 memory units, because this is what we need to figure out. And yeah, so in this setup, actually, when we have a 5 white integer, 6 white monster floating point, so it's totally 11 units. So actually we need so 11 units divided by 6 is 18. So yeah, we need 7 units for the memory. Yeah, probably AMD. I suggest for AMD that they will do the similar thing they do for the Cortex, because the Cortex has, as already mentioned, it has 5 memory units. So I suggest they will do the same also here for the Zen 3. So they will be, it could be even more. They could be like a, because we need the ratio should be like a two load two load instructions per one store instructions, or 2.5 to 1. So they could be 4 load pipes and 2 store pipes. This is like actually the maximum. So you can see the memory units are really the tricky part, really hard to predict. There is a lot of possibilities, but they don't do the calculations, so let's do not care about them too much. Most important are the integer units and the floating point units. And Zen 3 is going to be really big floating point beast. So this is the good part, and this is the most important part actually. So, but there is another interesting thing, and actually we can do predict Zen 4, because if we take those two designs, we can actually also predict some small changes which can bring actually the Zen 4. So yeah, let's check this out. Okay, so this is my suggestion for Zen 4, and Zen 4 could bring some more functionality. My favorite, this more realistic option here, I do expect that the 5 white integer, they might expand this last port for the branch. They might expand it to full, also combined with the LAU and maybe some shifters. So it can help a lot in some uh, some some code. So this is pretty decent upgrade. Also, I expect that this additional store pipeline will be also paired with the address generation unit. So there will be more memory units. And the biggest thing is actually here. I expect to be Zen 4 512-bit wide memory. This is a huge thing. It can bring another maybe 20% in the floating point performance. In some optimized code, it will bring a lot of performance. And if we compare to Intel, Intel is using two 512-bit wide AVX512 units. And when we compare it, this behaves like a one unit, this will behave like a second unit, and this will behave like a third unit. So yes, in terms of raw performance, Intel will be outperformed at least by 50%. And because of this, because AMD will use like a 6 pipelines, I do think that AMD Zen 4 will outperform Intel in every floating point load, because it will give you raw performance 50% higher, And in normal code, which is using maybe 128-bit wide vectors or 256-bit wide vectors, so in this type of code, those 6 pipelines, those will absolutely destroy Intel. So yeah, Zen 3 and Zen 4 will be really beast in terms of floating point, and Intel has like really low chances. We will see what the Golden Cove will bring, but yeah, this Zen 3 looks really good. And the same setup for the bigger variant. Yeah, there is not big change. The bigger variant here, we can see here that it has a similar setup like the Cortex core. So there is actually 4 pipes for the load instructions and 2 pipes for the store instructions. No, the similar actually is a kind of bigger. As a one pipeline for the load is more. In compare this small variant, there is a 2 more load pipelines, so it's a bigger variant than the Cortex actually. So yeah, I expect they might add Zen 4 could have 4 memory units, 1 for load, 1 for store, and 2 combined. So yeah, this is my suggestion for the Zen 4, and these additional units for the memory, this will actually solve the problem we calculated with the memory units. But it's a question if it will be solved by the raw power or some trick in the out-of-order mechanism. Yeah, but anyway, when you summarize the Zen 3 will be absolutely floating point performance monster, especially in the x86 world, because when we take a look on the back to Apple is already beast actually. Apple is already is beating everybody else in the floating point. So it's really hard to when we compare the A13 performance, the IPC, we can see here that the performance are really high. In integer, it's stellar, and even in the floating point, you can see the Apple A13. It's somewhere here. So you can see actually the Ryzen running on 4.7 gigahertz. This is this orange column. You can see that it's beating actually than the Apple. Apple is stronger in the integer when we calculate actually the performance per gigahertz, and we make a ratio here. We will get Apple is in this spec 2006 benchmark is faster by 84%, but in the floating point it is only 60%, and Zen 2 is faster only. And actually Zen 2 is losing. Apple A13 has a 52% higher IPC than Zen 2. So actually Apple is already using super wide architecture, and yeah, so Zen 3 will be beast. Zen 3 will be really similar to the Apple A13. It will come up with really high IPC. So it will be king of the x86. But when we take a look on the IPC graph here, we can see Zen 2 is here. Zen 3 in the integer should be somewhere here, but in the floating point performance could be somewhere here. So the IPC performance of Zen 3 could be somewhere here. But the problem is that this Cortex X1, they actually not added 50% of the problem is, I will show you the picture actually, that oh, this picture. Yeah, you can see here that Cortex 77 here, it has a 2 floating point units. Cortex 78 also has a 2 floating point units, but this Cortex X1 has a 4 floating point units. So they didn't increase like a Zen 3 will be increasing the floating point units by 50%, but they actually doubled the floating point performance. So this is kind of really ambitious and really problem for x86. Also could be problem for Zen 3. So the predictive performance for this Cortex X1 are really high. And don't forget that new server platform Zeus will be based on this Cortex X1, guys. And instead of running 128-bit Neon, it will actually run 256-bit wide SVE instructions. And this is really beast actually. So actually AMD is doing great job, but it will be king of the x86. And but it's not the fastest, and probably it will be not the best CPU actually on the world, because the best CPU on the world actually is the Apple. It's like a no doubt, and Apple A14 will be somewhere here. Yeah, maybe here, we will see. But this Cortex is really beast, and AMD Zen 3 will be really good. It will be somewhere here, depends on the integer or floating point code. But yeah, this ARM Cortexes, which will next year will be powering the Snapdragons and the Android phones. Samsung S30 series should be powered by this Cortex X1. This is really IPC monsters already. It's beating Intel Ice Lake and Zen 2. So yeah, let's do not underestimate the ARMs, and this is also why actually NVIDIA is approaching to buy the ARM, because those cores are super. When you can see the performance they are increasing, this is really high. This is really really nice. This is really kind of scary. If I would be like Lisa Su in AMD or some CEO of the Intel, I would be really worried about because this IPC and performance increases of the ARMs. This is really dangerous, because since Apple is like a kind of locked in the iPhone, it's funny, right? The best architecture on the world, which is the Apple A13, it's used instead of running in some really high performance servers. It's used only in iPhones. Yes, so Intel should be, yeah, it's no threat into Intel. Well, now it is, because A14 Apple is moving to their own silicon, and you can see why. This is this is why because Apple A14 will be the absolutely beast again, and will outperform Intel despite having really low frequency around 3 gigahertz. But these Cortex cores, they are, let's say, the second after Apple, the beast, and it's already outperforming Intel and AMD. So, and they are actually aiming to the servers. So the Zeus Neoverse N2 will be big problem for AMD and Intel next year. So, and that's why NVIDIA is investing $40 billion and buying ARM architecture, because ARM architecture is going to be probably dominate the CPU world soon, and the servers in 2-3 years they will have a majority of the servers probably. And yeah, this is and only AMD can stop it. And when we take a look on the picture of the future cores, this is really interesting, because when we see the Zen 3 here, could be somewhere here, Zen 4 could be a little bit higher, could be, I believe Zen 4 will be somewhere close to Golden Cove, and because of the floating point performance could be stronger than the Golden Cove actually, because Zen 4 will have a 512-bit wide vectors. So I think in the floating point could be really high performance for the Zen 4. So my expectation is for the floating point it will beat Golden Cove, but in integer it will be somewhere here. So Zen 3 and Zen 4 will be really good products, and but Intel is empire which strikes back, and they strikes back with the Golden Cove, and Golden Cove should be 40% above Comet Lake. And this is not this is kind of threat to AMD. So AMD will be, in terms of performance and IPC, yeah, this will be really good. 2021 will be a really good year for the CPU enthusiasts, because there will be big battle between the Golden Cove, which is the brand new architecture, and Zen 3 and Zen 4 will be like a floating point beast. So they will probably destroy even the Golden Cove in a floating point. But in integer, could Intel Golden Cove be better? But it will be really interesting, really close fight if Intel will solve the manufacturing issues with the 10 nanometers and 7 nanometers, or maybe they will start manufacturing at the TSMC, right? But you can see here the Matterhorn, the X2. This is why NVIDIA is buying actually the ARM, because this server platform based on this X2 Matterhorn, this is SVE vectors, scalable vector extension number 2 actually. This is the second version, and brand new ARM v9. And you can see the Nuvia. Nuvia is supposed to be here. It's absolutely incredible IPC. Look at the Golden Cove. Golden Cove 40% uplift, and it has a almost like a half IPC in compared to Nuvia Phoenix and Apple A15. And don't forget, Apple A15 will be another major redesign. Completely new architecture, probably 8 LUs. Nuvia is probably the same. This is the same chief architect, Gerard Williams III. He moved, he left Apple and created their own startup. So actually, father of those cores, this is the same guy who is actually developing, who is designing the Nuvia Phoenix core. So this is the same family actually. 811. This is the same guys was engineering this core. So no wonder that this high IPC. And actually, this Cortex cores, they are trying to catch the Apple. So they will probably continue this really steep slope. So they will try to catch the Apple and the Nuvia. And so a lot of interesting things is coming next year, because it's like a major redesign, major new design is the Nuvia Phoenix. There is a completely new architecture from the Apple. There is a completely new architecture from ARM actually, and completely new architecture from Intel, the Golden Cove. And Zen 4 will be second generation of floating point beast Zen 3. So next year is super exciting, and yeah, it's Zen 3 is just the beginning. Zen 3 and this Cortex, this is just the beginning. And yeah, I think for next year, it's absolutely insane what is coming next year. And yeah, I think that 2021 is going to be the best year in terms of CPU architecture in probably 2 decades, because we never had so many new architectures which is coming in the same time. So this is really exciting. So yeah, I hope you like this video. And let's see what the Zen 3 will be, and if this prediction is kind of right or not. And yeah, we will see. Yeah, I can be wrong, of course, but but it doesn't matter, because next year will be even better year for the CPUs. So